You're about to enter into a new world of knowledge, curiosities, and high strangeness. This is a podcast of Straight Up Strange Productions.
You're listening to Mysteries and Monsters. I'm your host, Paul Bestel. Welcome to the second part of the 100th episode of Mysteries and Monsters. So, if you're hungry for more contributions, on this episode, we will be joined by Micah Hanks, Brennan Storr, Andy Gilbert, Chad Lewis, Morgan Knudsen. But to kick us off, we have Lyle Blackburn taking us back to Boggy Creek to discuss Terry Sutton's unnerving encounter.
Well, one of the most dramatic and startling cases I've researched does go back to my longtime research area of Boggy Creek near Fouke, Arkansas. And this is one that always stands out to me. I've gotten a lot of reports of Bigfoot-like creatures over the years and certainly investigated a lot in the Boggy Creek area. But there's those ones that sort of leave you with that feeling that there is definitely something to this, and there is definitely a mystery that is tangible and something that's still out there walking through the woods. And this is one that when I was originally starting to research in Fouke for my first book, The Beast of Boggy Creek, people were telling me, well, you need to talk to this gentleman by the name of Terry Sutton. He had a sighting back in the 80s, and if anybody, is to be believed about that, it would be him. And several people had told me that, so I was able to track down this family and find Terry, and also speak to his father and discuss the experience they had had. And this dates back to 1982, in which they live in an area close to the Sulphur River in the backwoods, in an area called Jonesville, which is on the outskirts of Fouke in southern Arkansas. And anybody growing up in the 80s was well aware of the legend of Boggy Creek, because the movie had made their alleged creature, the Fouke monster or the Boggy Creek monster, famous. But it may not have been something that was on any individual's mind at any time. They were just aware of it. Well, Terry Sutton was about 14 at the time, and on their property they have a pond, which is a place where he often went and fished, and they had a little boat that he could get out on the water. And one afternoon, he went down there to do some fishing by himself, and he had been fishing there for the greater part of the afternoon. And during that time, he had heard something that sounded like it was walking around in the woods, some footprint, footfalls. And this was in February, so there was a lot of leaves on the ground, and anything that moved in there, you could hear it. There was a bull who lived on the neighboring property, so he thought, well, perhaps that thing has gotten over here and is wandering around, because on their property you would not have people walking around, trespassers or anything like that, because they lived on a big chunk of private land. So as it was getting later into evening, he continued to hear something walking around, and he heard some strange vocalizations of some sort, which kind of piqued his interest. He was wondering what this could be, and he hadn't had a lot of luck in fishing, so at some point he kind of paddled the boat around this little turn in the pond and decided to try a little bit more over there before it completely got dark. And the sun is going down at this point, and suddenly he hears what is distinctly the sound of footsteps coming up through those leaves towards the pond. And at this point, he looked up, and there's a little embankment that kind of rises up in front of the pond, and out of the trees, something walks up onto this embankment, and he could clearly see it was an upright creature, perhaps 6 or 7 feet tall. It was covered in shaggy, sort of brownish hair. It looked somewhat human in its proportions, yet decidedly ape-like, and it moved with its long arms at its sides, and he observed this thing at a distance of only about 60 feet. And it was very clear that this was not any usual animal. It was not a bear, and he realized this is not a person. This is some sort of an animal. And since he was sitting on that pond fishing, he was very quiet. And presumably this thing did not see him because it did not look in his direction. He saw it only from the profile as it walked up over this embankment and began to walk down on the other side. Now, of course, when you are a kid living in Fouke, Arkansas, suddenly all those thoughts about the Fouke monster, the legend of Boggy Creek, come rushing into your mind. And this is what was going through Terry's mind when he was seeing this incredibly fantastic entity walk there in front of him. And so, of course, once he sort of thought about it, he became extremely frightened. Though it didn't look at him, it was still there, and he could hear it walking. He couldn't see it anymore, but he could still hear its footsteps. So all of a sudden, it stopped, and that frightened him enough to paddle over to the bank and jump out of the boat. And when he did, he made some noise, and then suddenly he heard this thing take off running through those leaves. And that was it. Terry just took off pell-mell running for their house, which is a distance away from the pond. And when he got up to the house, he was frantic, just frightened and just shaken to the bone by what he had just seen. And about that time, his father drove up. His father had been, I believe, at a church service or something, or working down at the church, and he came in and he was like, Terry, what happened? And Terry said, Dad, I think I just saw the Fouke monster. And so his father quickly gathered his senses and said, well, let's confront this. Let's go down there and see if we see anything. And of course, Terry did not want to, but his father grabbed a sidearm and sort of, made Terry come along. And they went down there and looked around the pond area. They didn't see the creature, but they could smell this sort of a strong, skunky, musky type of an odor hanging in the air. And as they were investigating, they could hear things moving around out there in the woods, and they couldn't find any evidence. There was no footprints because it was leaves, but eventually it got dark and they were spooked, so they came back up to the house. So this was one of those incidents in which I was able to interview Terry, the witness himself, his father, Lloyd, and also over the years kind of gotten to know their family, which you don't always have that luxury in any sort of investigation. You may, interview the person on the phone or in person once or something. But in this case, I was, quite certain that this was a very credible story. It was a very credible young man who's, now an adult, and his family has a great reputation. They attend church. They're well respected in the community. And, I was able to talk to his family about this. And it's one of those where I had no doubt that Terry saw something that cannot be explained, something that defies explanation, yet he could see it there, just 60 feet away, this ape-like creature walking and disappearing into the woods. And so those are the kind of cases where it just keeps fueling the fire that there is something out there that just simply can't be explained, and something that keeps the research makes a value to the research that I do and that others do. And just as a side note to that, we filmed an episode, or I was on an episode of Shipping Wars, the TV show. Long story short, basically they wanted to do a detour and do a Bigfoot investigation. So I ended up arranging to actually do an investigation there on the Sutton property. And during the course of the filming, one of the cameramen was shooting B-roll back there in the woods when he observed a upright humanoid type figure running at him diagonally through the woods, and it was running extremely fast. And again, this is a place where there's really not any other people, because this is all private land, and that's one reason we chose that area to film. And this sort of really spooked the cameraman, and something that sort of changed his mind when he came down there. You're thinking, oh, okay, there's a Bigfoot thing, whatever. After that experience, his mind sort of was opened up to the possibility that there could be something strange lurking in the Falk area. So that's just one of my favorites that I've researched over the years.
Appearing back on episodes number 4 and 27, former police officer Andy Gilbert discussed some terrifying encounters from fellow police officers in his 2 excellent Credible Witness books. Both shows still receive great feedback, so I am once again delighted to welcome Andy Gilbert back for my 100th show. Andy, welcome.
It's great to be here, thank you.
Oh, well, as we said, your 2 shows, both focusing on an aspect of the paranormal which always seems very popular, and especially in your regard, Andy, because these were first-hand witness encounters that were passed to yourselves as you were a member of the police force. So how has it been, and how do you look back fondly on those 2 books?
I'm quite proud of them, because I think what they lack in finesse, I think they are 2 honest little books, because I'm not a professional writer and I'm not an expert in the paranormal. But I think what I got was 2 honest books with people who were prepared to tell stories, many of them for the first time. And I found it really, really interesting. So I'm pleased with them. Most people have given me a kind review. I've had a couple of horrible ones where they point out the grammar mistakes, but like I say, none of us are perfect. And 1 or 2 people have complained about the bad language in the books. And my answer to that is, well, if you'd seen a ghost, you might use some choice language as well, you know.
Oh dear! I mean, it does make you laugh. I mean, that's the joy of the internet. And, you know, it shows the well-worn cliche. You simply can't please everyone.
Oh, no, I don't expect that, and if people don't like it, I've got no issue with that at all. But, you know, it's a book that's raising money for charity. I do state from the outset in the book that I'm not, an expert, but there's just 1 or 2 that I thought, oh, you've been a bit over the top there, really. But that's just the way it is. But overall, they've been received well, and I'm grateful for the feedback I've got from people, because these are. I've just put it all together, but I do like the fact that people have come forward and just gave me a story that perhaps they've never told anybody else. And I love that aspect. And I love the aspect that all those people that say there's no such thing as ghosts, there's no such thing as the paranormal. I think, well, have a look at my books and then think again, because, you know, I think if a lot of them are written like they are police officers, as you'd expect. They've put them together like they've written a statement. And I think, you know, that's a piece of evidence there, you know. And you know, however much you want to sort of dismiss it and say, well, it must have been this, it must have been that. I think there's a lot of stories in there that can't be dismissed. So I'm just grateful to the people that helped me put it together.
Yeah, well, I think they're 2 fabulous books, and I still, I think I've read them both a couple of times this year, Andy. So they're books that I will always return to, and I will always be delighted to have them as part of my collection, and you should be very proud of them. And like I say, listeners clearly appreciated the stories and what you brought, my friend. So, as we will say, anybody that's not a fan of them, then they can, bugger off. So, my friend, what have you brought to the table for my 100th show?
For your 100th show, it's about haunted police stations, but it sort of combines two, if that's all right.
Of course.
The first one is that, and there's a sort of a contrast between the two. The first one is Aldridge Police Station, which is a building. I think it's after the Second World War it was built. Nothing remarkable about it. But over the space, in the first book, I had two witnesses. One was a sergeant who had an incident in there whereby the coat stand was shaking, and then he had periods of cold and real intense cold and real strange feelings. He saw it shaking, and then he didn't. And then eventually this was thrown actually across the room. And I found that really sort of... because I know these individuals as well. I'm not saying that because if I don't know the person, that's any less merit. Because I know the four witnesses, all these witnesses, they're full set. They've given me these accounts separately, so there's been no collusion or no. So they don't know each other. Has actually given me who they are, if you know what I mean.
Yeah.
And I found that first one to be quite sort of interesting. And in the first book, it was also another officer who'd seen a presence at the window, a person, or what looked like the outline of a person, intense black figure. And he also had an incident in the cells whereby they were trying to set somebody up for a joke, but it sort of backfired on him in as much as he felt very, very oppressive feelings and ice cold, and thought this is all a bad idea. So that was the first book, and I just sort of put that together. And then I was approached when I did the second book by somebody who said, I've read the stories in the first book, and it was a police officer who told me that him and his partner, so it sort of corroborated, they both witnessed this together, over some years of time had been visiting that police station. It is subsequently, it wasn't 24/7 now, but the officers had access to it overnight, and they'd go and eat their sandwiches there when they were on nights because they were stationed at Walsall, which is a few miles away. And what he told me was they'd had the incident of the figure in the window, and they'd gone into the police station and then bowled in thinking of some sort of intruder there, only to find nothing. There were times when they went into the police station and said, this is so oppressive, something's here, we need to get out, and they would just go and eat their sandwiches on the, park up somewhere. And sometimes they'd go in there and everything was fine. And they had incidents of what sounded like the whole upstairs furniture was being thrown around, which led to these two officers. He said we actually ran out of the police station. It was that frightening. And these are two genuine 6-footers, officers with taser and all that equipment. And they don't scare easy, but this is the unknown, and they behave like any human being would by thinking, we need to get out of here. But I like the fact that they accepted that sometimes they're going to go in there and it's just going to be something is going to be there that's going to prevent them from staying. And just before I went to publish the second book, I think I was in the process of going through the proofreading. A guy contacted me, another sergeant, and said, I've just read the book, and he said, I need to tell you about Am I Too Late? And I said, no, you've just got any time. And he told me how he would be doing his paperwork. And again, he would have the feelings and the noises. So much so that on occasions he would go and actually do his paperwork sitting on the car park in his car. but one night, and this is because when you look at the 4 stories individually, then you put them all together, you can see an overlap of corroboration.
Yeah. But
he heard noises above, again, the sergeant's office, where the first incident had happened. He was in there when he heard noises above him. The room that's above him is a place where the other officers had seen the figure standing. So you can see how they all interlink together.
Yeah.
But he got to a point where he said that he was that frightened that it almost got to the point where he wanted to confront it.
Yeah.
And he started moving up and down the corridor, and they'd be like banging and crashing. He said, but whenever he stopped, the noise would stop. So it was clearly responding to him.
Yeah.
And he said that he was calling out to it, and he went to walk off back down the stairs, and he felt something grab him by the wrist. And I think it's interesting at this point, he can't see anything, but he's gone to move away, and he's felt something physically grab his wrist to stop him moving. And at this point, he felt not frightened, but sort of relieved that whatever it was or is had acknowledged him.
Yeah.
And he always felt that it was more mischief than evil.
Yeah.
But although it's very frightening, he didn't think that that whatever it was trying to hurt him, but was just wanted attention.
Yeah. I mean, it is remarkable because, both books are filled with stories of burly, experienced police officers who essentially end up questioning everything that they've been trained under, because when you go into a life or death situation, and being a police officer, occasionally you will find yourself in very stressful situations.
Yeah.
The one constant in both books is the fact that these seem very rational, down to earth members of the police force that have had experiences that have just made them question the reality of their training.
Yeah, and in a lot of the cases, they have done what their training has sort of trained them to do, in as much as they try and find out, following a standard investigative procedure, what has happened here, and they can't find the answers. They've actually tried to find out what it was, what's happened to me here, what could it be, and they can't find the answers. Yeah. So yeah, it's very, very, very interesting. But the thing is with Aldridge, it's such an unremarkable sort of building, and it's been sold like not many sort of police stations have been sold over the recent years. And I'd imagine it'll end up being apartments and something like that. And it's just a case of there's no history. I've tried to find out from people who've worked there. Something horrible happened here. Do we know, is this somebody who used to work here? Who or what is it that sort of, because this has been over a long period of time. Who is it? Why? And can't get to the answer, can't get to the bottom of it. There's been no sort of deaths in the station that I know of. There's been nothing, and it still remains a mystery as to what is it and why. And like I say, it's be a case of somebody might be, buyer beware if you're buying an apartment.
I was just about to say. In a former police station, yeah. Good luck to whoever lives on that floor. yeah, absolutely. But that's the thing with me. I am sort of the mystery of it. If ever there was like local paranormal investigators. Who are listening to this, then you need to come. As I think it's closed. I mean, I've been out of it now for quite a while, but I think it's closed now, and it is being sold. But in between, if anyone could get an investigation in there, it would be really interesting, I think. Yeah, absolutely.
The thing was, like, you've got Aldridge there, and I said it's still open-ended. Don't know what it is. And then I had, in the first book, there was Bishopsgate Police Station in London. Yeah. And this was whereby everything seemed to fit into place. Where Bishopsgate Police Station was an awful lot of history. It had been a hospital, and then subsequently the top of the police station was accommodation for police officers. And when this a police officer went and stayed at a friend's place, and she felt herself being tucked into bed, and the first time she just wrote it off as sort of a vivid dream. Then she went back with another friend, and then she actually saw a nurse come into the room. She had a tug of war with the bedclothes, and her friend the next morning said she had an experience where she was tucked in, and it was really interesting. But what happened was because I then got in touch with a guy via social media who works at that police station, and then he said there's a lot of stories like that, and he said that's the ghost of Evelyn Rolfe. There's a nurse who was killed there in a bombing in the war, And so, whereas Aldridge, we don't know who it is, in Bishopsgate, we can say everybody is pretty convinced it's Evelyn Rolfe, who's a nurse, and she seems to be carrying on doing what she did before in sort of this world. But the description that the witness gave me, I didn't know all this, but when I contacted the Bobby down in London, he sent me a picture of her, and there it was. It was a perfect match, with the glasses, the way she described it. And I just thought, bang on, that's, and it all seemed to come together on that one, whereas Aldridge still seems up in the air.
Yeah, I mean, that is, I suppose it's refreshing as well, Andy, because like you say, Aldridge is one of those situations where there isn't, or there certainly doesn't seem to be an explanation, as you've, looked into. And I think often when we get a haunting, it is unusual because often they'll say, oh yeah, this has happened, that's happened, it's because of this person's sad death or whatever, but it's been a police station. If anything untoward's going to happen, or if anybody's going to pass away, there would be written accounts of it, no doubt. So
exactly, yeah.
It's very intriguing, but I suppose that adds to the mystery of whatever it is, why it just likes to sort of wind people up.
Yeah. It's clearly an intelligence in the way it behaves, because it sort of responds to, and it's interesting. But I like the contrast between the two. Aldridge is still a mystery, but I like Bishopsgate, and also like Bishopsgate because it appears that Nurse Evelyn is still carrying on, and I quite like that, because it's not in. Although it was very frightening for the people who were tucked in and saw this woman walk in the room and try and take the bedclothes off them. It appears that Evelyn's just carrying on doing what she always did.
Yeah, and it's one of those things. I suppose she's just happy carrying on doing what she should have done and looking after people and making sure the bed's clean.
yeah, definitely.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, thank you very much, Andy. I'm going to say, because that is one of the standout stories in the books, especially the furniture moving about and the fact that it caused several officers to flee the building. So yes, and as I touched on, obviously you've written 2 books, and I know I do get a lot of emails and people mentioning the shows, but your career has taken a bit of a different path, and there sadly won't be a third credible witness because you've gone down a different avenue, haven't you?
I have, yes. I'm now doing sort of comedy performance and poetry. I've got a book out, Vulgarity with Clarity, which is a collection of very rude, crude, and vulgar poems, which reflect my personality perfectly. Again, they all go to the same charity cogs, which I raise money for. But yeah, I did the Leicester Comedy Festival last year. I've done Buxton Fringe Festival, and this year's been a bit of a write-off. But I'm sort of heading in that way now and enjoying myself. So if you like rude poetry, look out for me.
Excellent. Well, I'll make sure I put a link in the show notes for anybody that wants to try and track down that book. Thank you very much for joining in, and
no.
I wish you all the very best with your new career, and let me know when you're anywhere near me, and I will pop down and hopefully we'll have that pint we were going to have earlier this year, mate.
Yes, I hope so. So as I say, I perform for free or charity. I perform where people let me, you see. But most people seem to enjoy my sort of what I'm doing. But if vulgarity and crudeness is what you're into, then I'm probably your person now.
Well, listen, you take care. It's been lovely to speak to you. Thank you for joining in for my 100th episode. Like I said, you're one of my favourite guests, and I am delighted to have kept in touch with you both on the phone and also on social media, and I wish you all the very best with your new career, my friend.
Absolute pleasure, and all the best to you as well.
Now, Brennan Storr joins me to discuss the world of dreams. Brennan, how are we?
I'm good, Paul. I certainly haven't spent the last 2 hours on the phone with you talking about everything but this and completely losing track of why I'm here. Yes,
likewise, but it was enjoyable and fulfilling in its own way.
Oh, it absolutely was. My wife's out of town, so you're going to have a really hard time getting rid of me, is what I'm saying.
Dreams are a strange thing. As someone that is currently getting to grips with the reality of actually starting to dream again, or being able to remember my dreams. I'm quite interested in your take on that.
When we talked about me coming on, I was sort of initially uncertain as to what to talk about, but then I had this random call from a fella down in the U.S., and he is a researcher. He's working on his own book project, but he asked me a question about dreams, and it really sort of touched off this thing in my head, and I thought that is definitely something worth pursuing, because I am fascinated by dreams. I don't always, I think like everyone, I don't always remember them, but I have had my own experiences with precognitive dreams. And the reason I wanted to bring it up today is because I thought it would be really interesting to talk about the situations where people have shared dreams. And this thing in my own life, which has come to reveal to me that there are a number of people in my hometown of Revelstoke who seem to be dreaming about the same places, but those places don't exist. And so I thought it would be fun to sort of cover some of that ground and, yeah, just generally have a chat about the nature of dreams and shared dreams and what maybe they mean. Because I mentioned on my show, Ghost Story Guys, that I've started seeing a therapist recently because I have issues, Paul. This may shock you to know, but I have issues. And one of the things she said to me, which really surprised me, was that dreams to her, she said, it's not about the content. It's just about how they make you feel. And I very much disagree with that. And of course, she's the expert. But even though she has a point, I think it's maybe too reductive. Because there are, as I said, times when I've dreamed things which have come true. And instead of speaking in generalities, I thought I'd talk about some specifics. So just to start us off, as I mentioned, shared dreams. And I recall specifically myself, there was a time I dreamed about a friend of mine in a bus station. I was at a bus station somewhere in a city, and I remember it was quite a big place, and there were lineups for the different bays. And in one of the lineups, I saw a friend of mine. And I didn't think much of it. I saw them. They were doing their thing. They were waiting for a bus. And I myself was trying to buy a ticket somewhere else. Woke up, wrote it down, as I try to if I have a really particularly memorable dream. But it turned out when I ran into that friend a couple days later that same night they had dreamed about being in a bus station waiting for a bus. And that was my first indication that maybe these things can somehow connect. And from there, I recalled a dream I had about Revelstoke. And now this one's a little bit long, but I promise it's relevant. In the dream, I was at this gas station atop a hill, filling up my car, when these two little kids came out from behind the gas station. Now, in reality, that gas station is there. The building is there. The pumps are long gone. It hasn't been a functioning gas station, I think, maybe even in my lifetime. But the building is there. And behind the building is quite a steep hill going down to a park. And the area of town where it's situated is a very haunted area of Revelstoke. And your listeners may or may not know that back in 2016, I published a book, A Strange Little Place, The Hauntings and Unexplained Events of One Small Town, and that's, of course, the paranormal history of my hometown of Revelstoke. But in the process of putting together that book, I learned that area is absolutely the most haunted part of town, most densely haunted part of town. And so in this dream, these kids come up from behind the building, which means they must have come up the hill. And in the dream, I know them. I know them. I know their parents. And in that particular way dreams have of melding things which are and are not, in the dream, they were customers at my family store, which we absolutely had, but they were not real people. Or I should say, I don't remember their faces. But anyways, so I greet the kids. It's been a long time since we've seen each other. And I ask how their parents are. And they tell me that their parents are good and that I should come say hi. So I tell the kids, we'll get in the car and I'll take you there. And the kids say, no. Let's walk. And the little boy says to me, I made a path. And he's very proud and with a little bit of a knowing smile. And I said, oh, you made a path, eh? Because I'm thinking, this kid, come on. But he says, no, I made a path. And so there's someone else with me. I don't know who, but we follow him between these two buildings to the hill. And instead of there being a steep slope with grass, which is what's really there is this set of wooden steps cut into the hill. And I distinctly recall the steps are wooden planks with a stamped tin plate in the middle of each of them. I don't remember what was on the plate, just that it was stamped tin. And the railing next to the steps is a heavy chain hung between posts. So I followed this kid down these steps, and they're quite steep, so I really have to just look at my feet, one after the other, down the steps, and I'm not aware of my surroundings, although at some point I hear what sounds like rushing water, like a waterfall almost. And then I get to the bottom, and the kids kind of disappear through this hedge, so I follow them through, and I'm on a dirt road. The road extends to my left and to my right. To my right is a small hill, and the kids run up that hill. Just before the hill, there is a stream with a wooden bridge, and the bridge spans the entire road, and it's a very narrow, or I shouldn't say narrow, it's a very short bridge, maybe 6 feet. And as I recall, the slats are very, very well kept. It's not an old falling apart bridge, but they're these maybe 4-inch across slats of wood holding this thing together. And as I see the kids ascend the hill on the other side of this, I also see a man cross the road, and he looks familiar, but I can't quite place why. So I cross the stream, climb to the top of the hill, and at that point I realize I'm at a kind of an intersection. To my left, the road falls away out of sight, and in the distance I see Revelstoke. Now, Revelstoke is a small town, about 7,500 people. There are 4 roads that lead in and out of Revelstoke. They go north, south, east, and west. That's it. 4 roads. And I remember thinking to myself, I don't know this road. This isn't a road I'd ever seen before. And I don't know how it connects to Revelstoke. But I thought, okay, well, fine. And to my right, the road again falls away down a long hill, and there is a long mountain valley with a river running in the distance along the left side. And the kids are running down the hill, and they're telling me to follow them. So I follow them down the hill, and by this point now the sun is starting to set. The shadows are getting deeper in the valley, and as I'm walking down the hill, which now the road is gravel, it's no longer dirt, it's gravel, and I notice there are a line of huts alongside the road, small ones. And as I look into each of them, I see what appears to be a mishmash of items from different time periods. So there's a brand new refrigerator with what appears to be an 1800s wood stove. You know, there's a toaster and what appears to be like again an ancient, really not ancient, but a really old kettle that you hang over a fire. So there's this weird mixture of time periods. And in one of them, I just happened to make out what looks like kind of a matronly woman, but I can see through her. And I see her and she's gone. So I think, okay, well, that's fine. Whatever. I'm seeing things. Yeah. So I follow the kids to the end of this road, and they take me to a house. And I meet their parents. And the parents, again, in the dream, I know them from my old business, and we chat, and I ask them how they're doing, and they say they're well. They ask what I've been up to, and I tell them, and I ask them what they've been up to. And they just keep asking me, well, no, tell us about you. We know what we've been doing. Tell us about you. And I don't think too much of it because I'm an egotist, when I talk about myself. Yeah. But finally, they invite me in for dinner, me and my companion in for dinner. And I think, yeah, sure, that'd be nice. So we go inside their house. Their dining area is a long, narrow wooden room with what looks like a covered bar at the far end. And the seats are wooden. There's a wooden bench along the left wall with, again, sort of like wooden planking on the walls. There's a table, and then, pull-out seats. So I sit in one of the pull-out seats. Behind me, the opposite wall from the bench seats is glass. It's just a series of enormous windows. And through those enormous windows, I can see right down the valley. And this valley, I should be said, this does not exist anywhere in Revelstoke. This is not a real place. And it's getting dark. It's really getting dark now. It's almost full dark in the distance, and you can see the shadows collecting and starting to collect their way towards us. So I sit down at this table, and I look at the food, and I don't remember most of it. I just remember these chocolate chip cookies, which are one of my favorite things. Big soft chocolate chip cookies with a big chocolate chips I mean, I can't eat dairy or wheat anymore because my body hates me. But once upon a time when I could, that was my favorite treat. And these are there, and they looked so good, Paul. I'm not even kidding. They looked amazing, and I wanted to eat them so badly. And then this voice in my head said, "Don't eat anything. Don't eat anything." And so the family sits down and they start tucking in. And I remember not one of them commented on the fact I wasn't eating. They never asked any questions. They just accepted it. And I said to the person I was with, like, don't eat anything. So after the meal, they move the tables and they say, well, we'd like you to stay a little longer because we have company coming. And people start filtering in from the far end of the room. And among them is a matronly woman who I'm pretty sure looks like what I thought I saw in that one cabin. And somewhere there's music, and I don't remember the music, but people start dancing. And I thought, well, that's lovely. It's fine. But by this point in the night, the moon has risen in the valley. And in the moonlight, as they pass through it, all the dancers become transparent. And I realize why these people were so hesitant, or I remember rather why these people were so hesitant to talk about what they've been up to, because they died in a car accident. They're dead. That's why I shouldn't have eaten the food, because it's their food. And all these people I'm looking at are dead. I'm watching the dance of the dead. And as I have this realization, the dancers move faster and faster and faster, and I wake up. So it's a powerful dream, and for a long time I just thought, okay, it's a dream. There's no reason to think anything more than that. But then I remember I was out for a drive one night, and it just clicked in my head. I remembered that one of my oldest friends had told me, 2 months before. Now, bear in mind, this is years after I'd had the dream. He had told me 2 months before that he had a dream about a mystery valley in Revelstoke, or outside of Revelstoke. And in his dream, it's like he saw it in the daytime. It was this fantasy valley that it's not really there, but he said, it's fields and it's really wild. There's mountains and there's a river that runs through it. And I remember him telling me the location of it. And the location in his dream, he said it's just before Mount Begbie. And Mount Begbie kind of sits on the western edge of the city, just across the river. And Begbie is also home to, interestingly enough, a number of UFO stories, and actually a legend of an Iceman that I spoke to a Scottish professor who actually went there, surveyed the site by helicopter, and said there's no reason for there to be an Iceman, but there are legends going back more than 100 years of a man being frozen in the ice. But regardless, it's kind of an interesting place, Mount Begbie. Very, very powerful place.
Yeah.
And that's where in his dream, he saw this valley. And as I was driving around that night, I was thinking about my dream. And then I realized when I was standing on that hill, before I descended into the valley, I looked at Revelstoke. And where I was standing, the view of Revelstoke puts me exactly where my friend says his valley was too. So we've both dreamed of this valley, and again, this is not information that we've shared with each other and then kind of like regurgitated.
Yeah.
This is not something we had talked about with each other. Because again, mine was just a dream, and good Lord, most of the time no one wants to hear about your dreams. So I write it in my phone when I wake up, and I just leave it. So I got in touch with him, and it turns out we also share another location. And now, to go south of Revelstoke is to go into what's called the Arrow Lakes region.
Yeah.
And once upon a time, you used to go south of Revelstoke on this little dirt road. There were homesteads and there were houses, and there were other communities. There was Beaton, Burton, Sidmouth, Arrowhead, Kamaplix. They were all down there. Well, in 1962, the U.S. government started pressuring Canada. Well, so I should say probably the early 1960s. They started pressuring Canada to dam the Columbia River for power purposes. And so we did. And now I don't remember the dates anymore. It's all kind of, turned to mush in my brain. But all those communities were flooded. Most of them were relocated. A lot of them are just flooded. To go south of Revelstoke now is to go into a dead end. Eventually it just ends in the river.
Yeah.
But in these dreams, the road ascends into these mountains. And it's a dirt road, and you're surrounded on all sides by tall grass. But what's interesting is we both dream about A, the same road, and B, the fact that that road is sometimes washed out at one particular point by a river. And again, you could just say, well, that's coincidence, and it very well could be. Maybe we just have some kind of psychological fixation about washed out rivers or washed out roads. But I think it's significant that we both kind of come back with that same thing. And for a long time, that was kind of it. That was kind of where that ended. But then I was telling another friend, a much older friend actually, about the first dream I told you about. And I got to the point about the stairs, and she stopped me and she said, "There's a chain, isn't there? A chain that you hold on to." And I said, "Yeah." She said, "Why do I know that?" And we've never been able to arrive at any kind of answer. But it's almost like she had been to the same place. And so you've got these like collection of shared dream space and places that don't really exist. Now, I'm going to go from there to the most haunted house in Revelstoke, which is called Holton House. And that is a Queen Anne style house built in 1897. It's still there. It's a beautiful old house. It operates as Mustang B&B now. And I've been in there, and it's undeniably haunted, but gorgeous house. But what's fascinating about that is a place that absolutely exists. And yet I have found 3 different people who have dreamed about corpses being located either above or below ground in one particular part of the property where there is, according to records at least, no one interred. These people were not aware of each other's dreams. In at least one case, one of these people lives in Italy and is a lawyer, and who just passingly mentioned to me, my family, because she grew up in Revelstoke, she said, yeah, I used to have to walk past Holton House on the way to school every day, and it always scared me. She said, for some reason, I used to dream about there being like dead bodies, on the right hand side of the house. And I said, well, funny you say that, because I know 2 other people who have dreamed about, one who dreams about there being bodies buried there, and one other person who dreamed about a garage full of headless bodies. And again, could just be coincidence, but even if it is, it's a fascinating coincidence.
Yeah.
And the most recent wrinkle has come with sort of a Facebook group that someone put up of all things. And what happened is, I dream. I haven't been back to Revelstoke at all this year, obviously because of the pandemic.
Yeah.
And I go back less and less, partially because I find it difficult to be there. I feel like it's a very powerful place. There are some natural energies there. I won't pretend to understand what they are, but they are very difficult for me to be around. Like disturbed sleep. At nighttime, you always feel like someone is watching you.
Yeah.
And there are certain places where I can no longer go past a certain time of night, or I start to get a headache, of all things. But anyways, so I dream about Revelstoke, and that in and of itself is not unusual. But I came to realize that, again, I dream about places in Revelstoke that are not there. There's a particular bend in the river. There's a road. Because once upon a time, to get from Revelstoke north, to go north from Revelstoke, you went on what's called the Big Bend Highway. And it's a 6-hour circuitous drive up along the Columbia River through the Selkirk Mountains. It was apparently a hellish drive. That stopped in 1962 when they built what's called Rogers Pass, which is just a direct highway connecting you from west to east. But yeah, prior to 62, you used to have to take that long road. And again, the woods around Revelstoke are full of strange stories. I mean, there are a number of Bigfoot encounters. Supposedly on that Big Bend Highway, there was someone who claims to have hit one with their car.
Ooh.
And yeah, and they said that when that happened, they like went to go check on it. It was alive, so they went to go get help. And when they came back, it was gone. But I was never able to connect that to a particular person. That's sort of a more historical, kind of apocryphal story. But anyway,
yeah,
that was the route you took. Well, in my dreams, I remember driving this, I go north of town and there's a road, and I just thought, well, I'm dreaming about a place that's not there. That's how dreams work. But after a friend of mine opened this Revelstoke Facebook group, a lot of people who grew up there started submitting photos. And what's really been interesting is that photos of the Big Bend Highway have started to surface in this group. Now, bear in mind, these are photos that have been in private collections, someone's drawer.
Yeah.
These are not, widely available online. They are now because people have taken them and posted them, but this is not something I had ever seen. Well, Paul, it looks like I've been dreaming about that highway and the version of town that once led to that highway.
How strange.
There's a particular incline on that highway that went, again, it was very steep, went up into the mountains, and I have dreamed about driving that hill probably a half dozen times. And I remember seeing a photograph and thinking, holy shit, that's the hill. Mm-hmm. So again, I don't know that it means anything. I don't think there's some grand design behind it all. Mm-hmm. But you and I were talking, as I mentioned off air, we've been talking for a little bit, and one of the things we talked about was synchronicity.
Yeah.
And I don't think it's something to ignore.
Mm.
Even if it doesn't in and of itself mean something, I think the fact that it's happening is significant and worth examination. And so when I hear now about people dreaming about Revelstoke, I'll try and get them to tell me about it without kind of poisoning the well, without telling them why I'm asking, which can sometimes be awkward. Tell me about your dreams.
Yeah.
They speak directly into my lapel.
Yes.
But yeah, and so there is just this fascinating second geography to Revelstoke, and I've talked about this a little bit in past, but it just keeps getting deeper and deeper the longer I kind of look at it. Mm. And there's a whole other thing, there's a whole other dimension to Revelstoke that I've never talked about publicly. And I think I've told you a little bit about it off air. But the nature of this other thing is something I can never publicly disclose. But there is another element to that city which suggests that there's much more going on there than you might think. Much more going on than simple haunting and Bigfoot sightings. I think there's a much larger entity involved. I will put it that way. But so I don't know if this dream geography is related to that.
Yeah.
Or if it's just this is common to all places, and I just happen to be in a position to be aware of it.
Yeah. I mean, dreams are a strange thing because I'm one of those odd people that until recently, I just didn't dream. Or if I did, I didn't have the recall that a lot of people have when they awake and they can remember what they've been dreaming about and how they felt and the emotions they've gone through and what they were dreaming about and who they were with. But over the last 5 or 6 months, and I think, ironically, this is because I've stopped smoking.
Okay.
Whether tobacco has been inhibiting my ability to dream or to recall the dreams, I can essentially say I couldn't tell you anything I dreamt about the first 6 months of this year. I can probably tell you 10 or 12 dreams since June, so post quitting smoking, which for me is very odd, because it's not a sensation I'm used to.
Right.
If that makes sense. And what has been interesting is I've had a similar dream twice, which I had many, many years ago, of a similar nature, which essentially, this might sound a bit strange, or I've been watching too many exciting dramas, but basically, I have done something, I don't know what I've done, and the police are after me.
Interesting.
And I steal a car, but I can't drive. And I'm drunk when I'm stealing this car, and I have to just get away, and I end up crashing this car wherever I am, and I've had it more than once, and it's not been the same dream every time, but the essential ingredients are the same. I've done something, I'm on the run, I'm drunk, I steal a car, I crash.
That's fascinating.
And I've had that half a dozen times over the last 20 years. And it sticks with me because it's unusual. Primarily because I can't drive. firstly. And even if I could drive, I certainly wouldn't drive drunk.
Right.
And I've never been on the run from the police. Touch wood, so far.
You're a young man yet, Paul.
Yeah, there's plenty of life in this old dog. And so it strikes me as it's just being an alien concept to me. And it's not something I can prescribe because I don't tend to watch crime dramas. I'm not a big fan of police dramas or anything like that.
Right.
So it's not something that you can absorb through the osmosis of entertainment, and it's peculiar. And the last time it happened, it took me back to where I grew up, whereas the other occasions have been in areas that I didn't recognise.
Right.
So it's just something that struck me as unusual that. Like I say, that I could remember the weirdness, because when I had the dream originally, it made me feel really uncomfortable. When I awoke, I felt odd about it, and I could remember it very clearly and very vividly.
Right.
So I've often had a love-hate relationship with dreams because, I don't have bad dreams, I don't have nightmares. Luckily, I could probably count the number of nightmares I've had in my entire life on one hand, which, based on the forms of entertainment that I take in, I would suspect it's quite surprising for a lot of people. With the stuff I read and the things I watch, and the concepts I discuss on this show, I would imagine some people would be quite frightened. And I talk to people about terrible things, and I watch documentaries about serial killers and horrific incidents and all sorts, and I would a real interest in history. And obviously that's just full of horrendous things across the world. So I can't put my finger on what it is. But like you, this framework is clearly a concept of some form of communication. Now, what that is, whether it's my brain trying to sort something out, it's the way my brain reconfigures feelings or anxiety or thoughts, I'm not sure. It's just unusual, and that's what strikes me most about it, because of its storyline, the way it makes me feel, and the alien situation that it is.
I mean, I think there's a strong psychological component to that particular dream. I can tell you my interpretation of it off air if you'd like.
Yes.
But I think some dreams are like that. I mean, I tend to have apocalyptic dreams. Mm. And I don't think it's because I'm presaging the apocalypse. I think it's because I have a very deep fear of being caught up in something I cannot control.
Yeah.
And I mean, when the pandemic first started this year, we spent the last 2 weeks of March, so really the beginning of the pandemic, in full lockdown because my wife had a potential exposure to someone at work who may have had the virus. And of course, in March, we knew so little about the virus, so all we could do was just stay inside and hope we didn't get sick. And thankfully we didn't. But I remember waking up every day and having this brief second where I didn't remember. And then the full weight of living in what was basically my living nightmare just crashed back in on me because I was literally caught up in something I could not control, which could very well kill me.
Yeah.
And so I do think there is a component of dreams which are just kind of helping us navigate our own psyche and our own fears and kind of animating those fears and using them in a way that motivates us and sort of allows us to sort through our concerns and our traumas and things like that. But I think sometimes those things combine with the precognitive elements. And I think that's one of the reasons we don't know much about it is because I think it's so free flowing. It's hard to separate the fantasy from the insight.
Yeah.
Years ago, I had this dream, and I've told the story on the Ghost Story Guys. So listeners, if you've heard it, I apologize. But I used to dream about going to Los Angeles, and I'd never been to LA before. But in the dream, I'm in Los Angeles, and there's this pair of cop cars ahead of me, and there's two cops. And the cops tell me, oh, no, you can't go that way. There's a gang war going on that way. and it's really dangerous. You need to get out of here right now. And in the dream then progressed to, you know, the gang war kind of came up the street and embroiled us, and I was on the run, and I was being held like, you know, someone was helping me hide and all this shit. Sorry, I keep forgetting this. Yeah, all this stuff. I'm trying, man. I'm trying. It's very difficult. But again, just a really intense dream. But I wrote it down. Well, then a couple years later, I finally went to Los Angeles for the first time. You know, I was down there for 2 weeks, more or less by myself. And one night, I decided I was going to go to the City of Industry and take night photos because I love taking night photos of industrial spaces. And City of Industry is 12 square miles of industrial suburb.
Yeah.
You know, there's maybe like 200 people who live there, according to the census. And at night, it is empty. And we're talking massive wide roads with no one on them. And I felt jangled because I went there at midnight because, you know, I'm not very smart, Paul.
Yeah.
And I was doing my thing, and I felt kind of jangled, but I thought, well, it's just because, you know, it's your first time in LA, and you're out here alone, and believe me, I was alone. Like, it's a shame I didn't take better pictures, because it was a truly, truly brilliant-looking place. And then, finally, I got into a chat with a security guard, and super nice guy, wasn't warning me or anything, we were just chatting. And finally, I thought, now, you know, I think I should go. I think now is the time to go home. So I got in the car, headed towards the highway. But at the on-ramp, there was a police car parked at an angle across the on-ramp. And I remember thinking, his lights were going. And idiot that I am, Paul, hick, bonehead that I am, I thought it was just like a sobriety checkpoint. Because, you know, we have those here all the time. And, I mean, I don't drink anymore, really, so it doesn't mean anything to me. So I start driving up to it. Well, these two cops get out with their hands on their pistols. And I remember thinking, oh shit, okay. You know, put the car in a park, put my hands up and said, hey, I'm sorry, I'm not from here, I don't know what's going on. I thought this was like a sobriety checkpoint. And the cop says to me, did you not notice the road flares? And I looked behind me and I realized I'd been so transfixed by their lights, I completely missed the line of road flares blocking off the on-ramp. And I said, oh, yikes, sorry, okay, my bad. And the cop said to me, we have a shooter up on this freeway. You need to get out of here right now. Right now. And so I turned around, and I had to take surface streets most of the way back to the room I was renting in someone's house in Hollywood. But the next morning, I turned on KTLA, and I found out they'd been chasing this guy all through Industry for about an hour.
Yeah.
And he'd been shooting and all these things, and I had missed it somehow. I just missed it.
Yeah.
But later that day, the parallels between that and the dream hit me. Because the realistic part of that was I did, in fact, run into two cops. In the dream, they were underneath the freeway, not on the on-ramp.
Yeah.
But there was an on-ramp in the dream. And so it was what happened, just with the elements slightly jumbled, and with my own kind of fears about, again, being caught up in something I can't control, so being caught up in like a gang war and all this kind of stuff. But the core elements were there, and so I think dreams do that sometimes. I think you have there can be these elements which are factual or maybe precognitive, and then we kind of have to interpret them using an imperfect mechanism. But that has been my experience, at least. Again, I'm not an expert, but I know if anyone out there has these kind of experiences, I would love to hear about them.
Yeah, me as well. If anybody can explain what the hell's going on in my head, I'd be delighted.
Well, I mean, there's only so much science can do, Paul.
Well, that's been thoroughly thought-provoking. So thank you, Brennan, and thank you for joining me on my 100th episode.
Oh, thanks for having me, Paul. Congratulations on 100, man, because, well, you've earned it. I told you this off air. I'll tell you this now. You're great at what you do. You deserve the success you're having, and I hope and I'm convinced you will have more of it, because you're one of the best out there. You know so much about the subjects, and I think your subjects, the people you speak to, I think they recognize that, and I think it makes them feel appreciated, and consequently, you can go deeper on subjects than a lot of other people can, because you just have the knowledge, and that is a beautiful thing to hear, and I look forward to seeing the show grow.
Thank you. It means a lot, especially coming from you, my man. So thank you.
My pleasure.
Next up, I'm joined by the marvellous Canadian paranormal researcher and one of the country's greater exports, Morgan Knudsen. Morgan first appeared on episode 64 and gave us a wonderful tour of Edmonton and beyond. Morgan, welcome.
Oh, it's so good to be here again.
Oh, my pleasure. My pleasure. Now then, I'm expecting the spooky from you, so I hope I'm not putting too much pressure on you.
Oh, I've got spooky. Are you ready for it?
Oh, I'm born ready. Hit me, Morgan.
All right, so probably one of my favorite cases, and a case that I've been writing about now for quite a long time, is based out of right here in Edmonton, Alberta, Canada, and started way back in St. Albert. But before I get to that, I'll tell you the first part of this case, the current day side, and then it'll become more amazing as I go along. So my very good friend and fellow investigator, Matt Spearin, we met about 15, 16 years ago at one of my lectures, and he had come up to me at the end of the lecture and said, I've had these incredible experiences with when I was a kid that I don't know what to make of it, but there was basically, he described a huge creature that would come through his window in the middle of the night as a child, and looked like this long, skeletal, very lanky, almost dog-like creature that would come through the window and attack him. And it sounded like a child's nightmare is really what it sounded like. And but the more he began to describe it, and the more he described the phenomenon around it, the more I realized that there was something a little bit more going on. So he ended up basically, his parents were, of course, dealing with this as well. And he ended up becoming very sick with this. He had swelling of his hands and feet. His face swelled up. He ended up with a horrible fever, which put him in the hospital. The doctors had no idea what was going on. He broke out in a rash on his hands and feet. It was just bizarre, but it just about killed him. So anyway, he could never figure out what exactly had happened, and of course he's got this strange phenomenon going on in his house with something coming into his window at night and at one point during the daytime. So anyway, we didn't quite understand what to make of this story. The accounts ended up quitting, but it wasn't until he was quite a bit older. And when we began to take a look at the area that he used to live in, we found something that was pretty incredible. He was in a house at the time near a place called St. Albert, which is where the illness had started. And St. Albert, we discovered, was actually the home, or became the home, of a very disturbing piece of lore and piece of Alberta history, which was a trapper by the name of Swift Runner in the late 1800s. He ended up basically coming down. He was banished from the people that he was with, his family. He was basically shooed out of his village and into the winter's late 1800s. And he showed up at a mission in St. Albert and knocked on their door and said, my world has come apart. My family is all dead. They died of starvation. This is such a horrible winter. I need help. They let the guy in. And the fellow who was running the mission at the time, his name was Father Lacombe, started to clue in that something wasn't quite right, because Swift Runner was a huge man, 6'5", 200 plus pounds, and he didn't look like he'd lost a day's meal at all. He was looking extremely healthy. And when Swift Runner stayed there for quite a long time, but when he was in the mission, he was claiming, and they could hear him yelling, that there was a dog-like creature that was coming through his window trying to eat him, trying to attack him. And in the lore of the First Nations here, it's known as the Wendigo. And what happens is that when people say that they've seen this thing or they've been attacked by this thing, what happens is that you end up getting swelling of the hands and feet and face and this rash breaking out and this extreme fever and all of this stuff. So Swift Runner basically was putting everybody's red flags on alert at this point, and they ended up calling the Northwest Mounted Police, who came down and arrested Swift Runner. When they went back to the campsite they ended up discovering that Swift Runner had murdered his entire family. He had eaten them. He'd killed his kids. He'd eaten the kids. And they even found one of the child's slippers stuffed into a skull that was sitting there. It was horrifying. Swift Runner ended up to be the first legal hanging here in Alberta. And when he was arrested. But what was fascinating about this for us, because we had no idea of the history or anything else, is that not only did Matt live within a short walking distance from this mission that Swift Runner stayed at, but when he moved to Edmonton, he ended up within a walking distance of another Wendigo case, which was kitty corner at a local abandoned hospital here, where there was said to be a Wendigo possession. It was really interesting. So what we thought and what we've uncovered, because Matt's he's a brilliant intuitive, and what we think happened was that he was actually picking up on some of the residual stuff that had gone on and was interpreting it in his own way, not knowing what that was at that young age. But he was actually interpreting it and exhibiting some of these signs and symptoms. But it was phenomenal because he had no idea that any of this had happened. I didn't know any of this had happened until we started to look into it in the last couple of years here. And but it still remains probably one of the most unique cases, and it just about killed the guy.
Wow. Yeah, that's pretty spooky. Yeah. Goodness me. Thank you, Morgan.
You are so welcome.
I mean, it is peculiar as well, because I'm one of those people, I'm not a big believer in coincidence, Morgan, and it seems that he's found himself within two key parts of this Wendigo lore purely by chance.
Yeah, and I agree. I'm not a coincidence fan either. I think there was there's ties even within his family to the town that Swift Runner was a part of, a little town called Legal. His grandmother lived there, and we kind of wonder and question whether or not there is more of an actual tie and connection to the Swift Runner family, but we haven't gotten that far yet with the investigation. But it's it baffles us every single time because it's just bizarre.
Wow. Well, keep me informed.
Oh, I will.
Excellent. Well, yeah, you promised to bring the spooky, and you've certainly done that, Morgan. So all I'll say is thank you very much, and I hope everybody that listens to that tale sleeps well tonight. And I wish you and yours the very best. Have a lovely Christmas and stay safe.
Oh, you as well, Paul.
We continue on this second part of the 100th show with a very warm welcome back to Mr. Chad Lewis.
Well, hello. One of my favorite cases is a case that was one of the first ones I ever did about 25 years ago. It's a case I'm still working on to this very day. And it involves a case of a place called Elk Lake Dam, which is outside of my hometown of Eau Claire, Wisconsin, here in the United States. And I first received a report from two men who were out in this area one night, just relaxing, enjoying it. It's a nature area. There's a lake with a dam, and then you walk down through the woods to get to the spot by the dam where you can hang out. People camp down there, watch the water of the river go by and the rushing of the dam. And I got the report from two men who were sitting out there one night, just enjoying being there, when one of them turned around and he noticed what appeared to be a glowing woman in white standing right behind him. So he nudged his buddy and said, "Hey, do you know there's a glowing woman right behind us?" His buddy said, "Yes, but I'm too afraid to turn around and look." About 15 minutes or so went by. They finally got the collective courage to turn around and look. The woman was gone. So were the two men. They hightailed it out of there as fast as they could. One of them was so frightened, he refused to bring us back to the location to tell us what had happened. Luckily, the other one did. Now, at the time, I was a UW Stout student studying psychology. And one of the cohorts in my program was a young man named Aaron. He believed he was psychic, that he could pick up on these spirits. He was intuitive. So I decided to bring him along on the investigation. And when we went out there, we wanted to take a photograph of where the two men would have been sitting that night. They spotted this mysterious woman in white. And the goal was for me to take Aaron's photo and him to take mine. And so we snapped each other. And the problem was Aaron's camera malfunctioned. It wouldn't work. It was working properly before. It worked later, but it would not snap a photo. My camera did snap a photo. And when I had the film developed, remember this was back when people actually used 35 millimeter film, we noticed this weird mist or white fog on the photo where the two men had seen that woman. It didn't appear to the naked eye when I snapped the photo, but there it was on the negative. So I started talking about this case quite a bit at my lectures. And after one program, a gentleman came up to me and said that he lived out in that area in the 1970s. He recalled that there was a murder out there of some sorts, but that's all he could recall. So I started flipping through the local newspaper archives. I started in the year 1970, going day by day through the newspaper, looking for any indication that there was a murder out there. And unfortunately, by the time I arrived at 1974, I realized the man was right. There was a murder out by the dam. A young woman was murdered out there. And she was last seen, her name was Mary, she was last seen hitchhiking from Minneapolis to Chicago, Illinois. She was last seen being picked up on the side of the road by a gentleman that a witness drew a sketch of. That gentleman was last seen kicking something over the side of the road by the dam, dirt or leaves. Neighbors in this very rural area thought it was extremely suspicious. So they called the police. But by the time the police arrived at this rural area in the middle of nowhere, the man was gone. But the body of Mary was on the ground. She had been stabbed to death. And even though they had a witness description of the murderer, he was never captured and the case went unsolved. So that was then that I decided to go back to this place. If it was haunted, perhaps it was haunted by this young Mary, the woman who lost her life there. And I brought Aaron, the psychic, with me again. And he wanted me to take a photograph of a pillar by the dam, which I did. I took dozens of photos of that pillar. The only one odd came back again with this weird mist or fog that wasn't visible to the naked eye. Now, back when we got these photos, we used to send them in to either Kodak or Fuji, whatever film we were using. And we'd always send them the photo with the negative saying, "Could you help me? What happened here?" We would never say, "Is this a ghost?" And we'd always get the same form letter back from them saying, "We looked at your photograph. It's not a double negative. It's not a light leak. It's not a developmental error. Whatever is on the photo was there when you snapped it. We're sorry it ruined your film. Here are a couple free rolls of Kodak or Fuji. Thanks for using our film." But what this proves is that I couldn't explain what I was capturing on those images. But according to the photographic experts, it was not the laundry list of things I just mentioned. It was also here that same night that we had investigators down, researchers down on the bottom by the water, and some up above, up on the dam, the area, the bridge that goes over the dam. And while we were down below, we heard what sounded like a woman screaming. But it didn't quite sound human, although it didn't appear to be a recording or a mechanical noise. So we radioed up to the people on the bridge and said, "Did someone just come by in a car and yell at us or a woman scream at us?" And they couldn't hear it from up there, probably because of the dam's noise. But down below, we swore we heard a woman screaming. But as we were leaving that night, Aaron thought that the ghost of this woman was going to try to follow us back to college. So we snapped one last photograph of the area, and when the film came back, the photo was almost completely whited out by this weird mist or fog, which many people have seen shadows in it, images, faces, and the like. We didn't know it at the time, but people in that area had trouble with their equipment as well. Just like Aaron's camera had malfunctioned, we didn't know it, but construction workers had trouble. They would try to do repairs on the dam, and they would come in, and their equipment would stop working. They would haul it out. It would start working again. Batteries would die, and people would need to be jumped to get out of the area, as though something was draining all of their batteries and the electrical equipment in that area. So once I got that picture back of the weird mist or fog, I thought that would be the end of the case. But it wasn't soon after I started talking about that when a woman contacted me. She said, "Thank you so much for your research about this place, because my mother lived in the house that sits right on the dam. She's now passed away, but when she was alive," this woman said, "we thought she was going crazy because our mother kept telling us about a woman who would walk up in the back of the wooded area from the dam and knock on her back window and want to come in for cookies and tea." And she said, as her family, we thought she was just getting old and crazy. And she kept calling this woman Mary. For years, she said, she would come to her back door. And she said, then when my mom passed, I thought nothing of it until I heard your lecture about this young woman named Mary being killed on the side of the road there. And I thought, is it possible that the same thing was happening? She was encountering this spirit as well. But the good news about this case is that so many people have heard about it and gone out there to experience their own ghostly adventure. So many media outlets have covered the story that the local sheriff's department reopened the case into the murder of young Mary. They even dug up her body looking for DNA evidence, which unfortunately they did not find. The whole area seems to be cursed. I could write an entire book about this area from all kinds of oddities. One gentleman who lived on the other side of the dam borrowed a ladder from his neighbor. It was around Halloween time, and his neighbor lived right next to the dam. So he went to return the ladder to the neighbor and go to put it in his garage, and when he went out there, he saw a man hanging from a rope inside the garage, seemingly dead. But the neighbor thought it was Halloween. It was just a Halloween display, put the ladder back, thought nothing of it. A few days later, the authorities showed up. It was a suicide in that house in the garage there that the man had encountered, but he thought it was a prop. He didn't know it was a real person. And the area is flooded with oddities too. A father and son serial killer team lived right up the hill from the dam. They were actually killing people and burying them in their swampland on their house while living next to the dam. But stories would often come to me also from people who had weird experiences out there they just couldn't explain. One young gentleman, and young I mean college age, contacted me and asked how Mary had died. He wondered if she had drowned. And when I asked him why, he told me that him and his buddy went out to the dam one night to see the ghost. They were both looking at opposite sides of the bridge, leaning over a little bit, looking at the water. When all of a sudden, his buddy noticed that he was crawling up the bridge and was about to jump in. So his buddy rushed over to him and said, "What the heck are you doing?" Shook him a little bit. And his friend was crying, and he seemed to snap out of this trance. And the young man said that he was possessed by who wanted him to jump over the bridge and commit suicide in the water. That's why when he contacted me, he thought that maybe she had drowned instead of being stabbed to death. Others have had weird experiences on this road. Many have seen what appears to be a woman on the side of the road near the bridge. Thinking maybe she broke down or needs some assistance, they would often slow down, only to find that she was nearly transparent and would often vanish right into thin air. Now, of course, many of your listeners are immediately thinking of the urban legend of the vanishing hitchhiker. All over the world, these women seem to be appearing on the side of the road, mostly women, and then disappearing, or they'll get picked up and give an address, and when the driver looks over, the person's no longer there. Others have had all kinds of oddities with their lights flickering on and off and their batteries of their vehicles having troubles as well. Others have contacted me about believing that they were cursed living out in that area. And it should be noted that the lake that drains into the dam is the site of many drownings over the years from children who have been swimming in the lake when they met their watery end. And what I love about this case is that stories seem to only be morphing and progressing as the years go by. As more and more people hear about this place, they go out there and have an experience that 25 years ago when I first went there, nobody had ever heard the story. The murder had been long since forgotten. But as more and more people go out there, it seems as though it acts as almost a paranormal beacon or doorbell of sorts and gives more power to the legend, and more people have experiences when they're going out there. The sad note to this case is that after all these years, the case still remains unsolved. They have never captured the gentleman, even though they had a witness drawing of him. They had a lot of clues about him. The case was never solved. Many of the detectives that worked on the case, when they retired, they said it was their biggest regret in their entire law enforcement career that they could not have saved or at least finished this case and solved it. And I talk about this case quite a bit because it's one of my favorites of all time. And I often look out into the audience and wonder if the murderer has ever shown up at one of my programs to watch his grisly deed on the big screen. And it always gives me a chill thinking that murderer is still out there. Because I really hope that someday this young Mary, her spirit, can get the peace and rest that she so badly deserves. And that's what makes this one of my favorite cases that I've ever investigated.
That is just one of those areas, Chad, that just seems to be a magnet for weirdness.
It does. It's one of those what John Keel would call window areas, these portals, these beacons that there have been UFO sightings out there, mysterious creatures in the area, and a lot of hauntings, suicides, murders. If there are such things as these paranormal portals, I would put this right there on the top of the list.
It is interesting, like you say, because obviously the chap Aaron had the issues with the camera, and that seems to be something that we can prescribe to several areas and several cases, Chad, where people's electronic equipment malfunctions, and obviously it's even more validated by the issues that the maintenance guys were having when they come to do repairs for the dam.
Yeah, it's one thing when people who are out there researching, expecting the odd and unusual, that they have their batteries drained or their equipment malfunctioning or other things happen because they're going there with the intention of knowing the story and the intention that something's going to happen. They're expecting it. Some are even hoping for it.
Yeah.
But when you get these credible witnesses who have no idea and probably no interest in the field, and they're experiencing something out there, it's much harder to just toss it away as, well, it's some self-fulfilling prophecy that obviously they thought something was going to happen, so it's going to happen. It's a lot harder to discredit that when it happens from basically oblivious people out there.
Yeah. And it is interesting that you've got this factual issue of this poor lady's murder. But as you refer to, because of the attention that this has sought, the police have obviously opened it up, and it's no. Is it still an active case then, Chad? It's no longer a cold one.
It is an active case. I sat down many years ago with some of the detectives that worked on the case, and for many years I struggled about presenting this case because it's always a tricky balancing act. Am I exploiting her death for a good ghost story, Or indeed, am I helping her case by bringing more attention to it and getting more eyes on it and maybe coming closer to solving it? So that's something I not only struggled with this case, but a lot of cases that deal with, suicides or murders or serial killers and the like, these gruesome, gory, graphic cases. There's always that question of, what is your motive for doing it? Are you helping? And in this case especially, I felt that the exposure to a previously cold case warranted the amount of the downside of promoting it.
I think the most chilling aspect of all of it, though, is obviously what this family told you about their mother. Because to have something or someone tapping at your back window, wanting to come in for milk and cookies, Chad, is perturbing to say the least. It would have been very interesting to see. Did she ever explain why she never let her in, or was it just that, hey, I'm not sure why anybody's banging on my window at this time of night?
From her telling the daughter and the family contacting me that it was a friendly relationship, almost like a friendship, where and so much of, as you know, of what we do in this field, a lot of it seems to be as much social work as it is investigating the odd when you're dealing with witnesses and other people. And the family, I don't know if they believe the mother or not, but they simply took comfort and solace in the fact that at the end of her days, they did not believe her mother was going crazy. That for them, it was a comfort knowing that whether this woman was walking to the back of the house or not, that their mother had a reason for telling that story. And it feels good when you can give some type of comfort to a family that maybe their mother wasn't seeing things or imagining. I don't know. I wasn't there, but so much of it does feel like social work dealing with people.
And I suppose, like you say, there are two positives. As you refer to there, Chad, it is difficult because I think a lot of times when we're dealing with the paranormal and things like that, especially when it's what you would call a crisis apparition or through a traumatic experience, I think a lot of people just forget that there are, or maybe still are, real people involved and real families. So it is a difficult balancing act, but clearly the end result is you've given solace to a family who now realise that their mother was having some kind of experience, and also the fact that this poor woman, Mary, who was so tragically murdered, the case has been reopened. And you never know in these days, because we see cases that get solved that have gone cold for decades, Chad. So anything's possible.
And I think just based on the research I've done over the last couple decades and then the explosion of true crime shows is that I think anybody, any family, any loved ones or friends that are dealing with a loss of somebody in such a tragic way, and it's a cold case, I mean, I think that's why they participate in a lot of these true crime shows, to shine more light on the case, that anytime they can make it so not only is the case not forgotten, but their loved one is not forgotten, I think that's a plus for them. And, watching these shows, whether it's Dateline, 60 Minutes, whatever they are, you often wonder, why in the heck would somebody put themselves through this emotional chaos to relive the loss of their loved one for all of us with our watching eyes to soak it in? And that really does answer the question, because they're hoping to get some answers.
Yeah. I mean, having developed a real interest in certain cases, Chad, it is remarkable. The most recent one was obviously the Golden State Killer, which was a fabulous series that was based on the Michelle McNamara I'll Be Gone in the Dark book about the Golden State Killer. And that series really sticks with you, because these are people, and couples as well, that have basically been tortured for years, who were living this nightmare, who were so terrified that this guy would never get caught. And it was only by coming together with Michelle McNamara that she was able to guide and point the police in the right direction. So anything's possible.
I agree, and I think that's what, especially when dealing with hauntings, it's a little different than when you're dealing with cryptids and somebody saw what they thought was a chupacabra. Well, there's usually some emotion involved with that, usually fear or maybe some embarrassment of telling the story, thinking people will think they're crazy, but there's not that intense emotional, almost post-traumatic stress disorder that appears, that often is associated with hauntings because it involves the loss of a loved one.
Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely. Well, that's a fascinating area, Chad, and certainly one I won't be visiting anytime soon. Well, thank you for supplying that and giving us all a chill, as I would expect. And it's a great pleasure to speak to you again, my friend.
Thank you, and keep an eye out.
A big thank you to Chad Lewis for sharing that unnerving and rather creepy tale about a tragic murder and a paranormal hotspot. Now, Micah Hanks asks us to join him as he takes us on a trip back to Bluff Creek in October 1967.
Greetings, Paul, and everyone. Micah Hanks here from the Micah Hanks program, and I arrive coffee in hand to provide a quick overview of a favorite case of mine. And really, it's hard to pick one. When you say, what is your favorite single case involving something unusual, I mean, how can you pick just one? There are several that come to mind. Of course, there is the famous incident involving the disappearance of pilot Frederick Valentich from 1978. Really a tragic case, and one that's near and dear to my heart because, of course, I had the opportunity to talk to his girlfriend at the time, who is still actually involved with UFO studies these days. Her name's Rhonda Rushton. And talking with her taught me things about that case that, in fact, had never been published before. You also have cases like the disappearance of Dennis Lloyd Martin, that one involving the disappearance of a little boy a little more than 10 years prior to Valentich going missing. And that incident occurred right over the mountain from me, where I live in western North Carolina. I've filed multiple Freedom of Information Act requests to different branches of government trying to get information about that case. And I'm still waiting, hoping, in fact, that the FBI will release the file that they have to civilian researchers like me, having gone on 50 years and still there being no resolution to the case. But as high as both of those cases are, the one that I have selected today to discuss, it's well known, but I think it's an important one because unlike most cases that involve claims of the unexplained, this is one that might actually offer some of the best evidence in existence for the phenomena it claims to support. And that is, of course, the 1967 footage obtained by Roger Patterson and Robert Gimlin in Bluff Creek, California, of what appears to be a female Sasquatch. Now, a lot of people call it, rather than Bigfoot, Big Suit. They say it's obviously a person in a suit. And I think that the problem with Sasquatch research is when we're talking about a species, an organism that is so similar in shape to a human being, and bipedal no less, it's going to be difficult to rule out that possibility that a human might be in a suit. If it were a dragon, a sea serpent, a UFO, and the footage were as clear as what that film from 1967 claims to show, I think it would be a different story altogether. And so if you can't rule out the possibility it's a person in a suit, why do we still talk about it? Why has that footage made the impact that it has? And I'll tell you that having spoken to film experts, special effects experts, professors of anatomy and anthropology who have really taken the time to look at that footage, I am beyond compelled to think that there is indeed a there, that there is something more to the footage than just a person in a suit. And of course, some of the well-known experts who have weighed in on this include Bill Munns, who has an entire website all about the analyses that he has conducted over the years. Bill's background is in Hollywood and special effects. And he essentially says a few things that, based on a thorough analysis, I have yet to find the zipper. And it seems that whatever that is, if it is a suit, is so sophisticated that there is nothing comparable that would have existed in the 1960s when the film was made, and in likelihood it would be difficult to fake it today. And to his point, if you watch recreations that have been made for television, some that have actually gone to the same location where the film was made there at Bluff Creek in 1967, you'll actually see that the best special effects, the best costumes of today, are uncompelling when put up alongside the subject of that film. And then, of course, you go over to other experts in anatomy and anthropology, like Dr. Jeffrey Meldrum of Idaho State University. And Meldrum's perspective is very clear. In addition to how convincing whatever is in the film appears to be, we also have the track record, the actual track line of footprints left by the subject of the film. And a lot of skeptics who have debunked what they perceive as a guy in a gorilla suit in the movie fail to put similar attention toward the question of the footprint castings, some of which, according to Meldrum, appear to show a mid-tarsal break, which anatomically is something that he has observed in many ancient and presumably extinct human ancestors. Their foot was slightly different from ours, and their locomotion, therefore, was also slightly different. And so taking into account this mid-tarsal break, also variances in toe displacement that is displayed in the actual footprint castings, 2 of which were made by Roger Patterson, the principal filmmaker at the time, and then another set that was made thereafter by a taxidermist named Bob Titmus. And actually there was an additional photograph taken by a Forest Service worker named Lyle Blackburn. So when you analyze all of these elements, there is a compelling case to be made that whatever left those footprints was not a false foot. Certainly they weren't carvings, the likes of which were used by Ray Wallace in the famous Bluff Creek hoax from 10 years earlier that made headlines first right there around that same area in Bluff Creek and then later all around the country and the world. And so the sum total of evidence, if nothing else, makes it much harder to say it was just a guy in a gorilla suit. But again, if the experts who have weighed in, just giving a couple of examples with Munns and Dr. Meldrum here, if all the range of experts who have looked at that and analyzed the film, analyzed the subject, and attempted to apply science toward it, if they have been unable to determine that this was simply a hoax, it doesn't necessarily prove that we have a Sasquatch on film, but it certainly strengthens that argument. And that's a whole lot more than can be said for similar instances from over the years where claims of something unusual or unexplained have been put forward. And so for that very reason, for me personally, the Patterson-Gimlin film remains one of the most compelling cases in all of history.
Well, it's time for the final contribution. And joining us, once more, is Stu Neville, to leave us with a rather creepy personal encounter with a shadowy entity.
My kids at that time, the oldest was around 7, the youngest was around 5. We lived in a house in South Bristol, which over the road was another row of houses, and behind it there was quite literally primeval woods. The woods have been there since forever. It's a steep river valley. Basically, from behind the houses, it goes steeply down to a stream, the brook, which empties into the Avon. And on that stream, about 200 yards down the hill from where we lived, there is an old pilgrimage well called St Anne's Well. Also, within the brambles themselves, which surround it, there's the ruins of an old chapel, and that's been there since the sort of 12th century. And it was a pilgrimage site, and in fact, Henry VII actually did go there and did sort of worship there at some point. And it came under the auspices of St Keen. However, there's also long been the story of a guardian there. Just along the road from where we lived, the top of the hill, there's a primary school. Now, and this was all, the estate on which we lived was built in the late 20s, early 30s. And when they were excavating basically the playground to build the new primary school, they dug up Anglo-Saxon artefacts, including a couple of Anglo-Saxon graves. Now, these were very well documented, respectfully done, respectfully reburied in the local churchyard and stuff like that. But the whole area clearly has a great deal of history to it. And there'd been legends throughout of a guardian of the well, which was a black shape, which we'd all heard about, and it had fascinated me since quite a young age. And I've always lived within a couple of miles of the place, so I was well aware of it and stuff, but I didn't think too much of it. Anyway, as I said, one night, there I was in our kitchen, which looked out, as most British kitchens do, into the back garden. It was dark, so the kitchen window, which was over the sink, showed my reflection because it was a very bright kitchen. I was doing the washing up. My youngest son, who at that time would have been about 5 or 6, was in the front room colouring. My eldest was upstairs playing with his trains, as they tend to be. It would have been about 6:30, 7 o'clock at night. My wife was at work. She was due home about 7:30, 8 o'clock, something like that. So there I was, washing up. And I looked up, and I noticed a shadow behind me. And I just thought, it's my shadow. then I realised that there was no light source in front of me. So I just thought, well, hang on, wait a minute. I kind of looked round. Well, actually, no, I didn't. I looked in the window. I looked at the reflection in the window because it was that sort of mirror-like. And I noticed the shadow move. And I thought, well, okay. Well, I rationalised it. Because at the back of our house, at the end of our garden, you could then look to the garden beyond, because another house backed onto us. There's no back lane or anything. But there was obviously a road there. And there was a big gap between their house and the house next door. So I thought, well, perhaps there's a car pulling into a drive and it's just literally shot a beam of light through the hedge or something like that. But no, it hadn't. There was no source of light out there at all. It was pitch dark. And I noticed this shadow move again. And I kind of looked at it. I didn't turn around, but I looked and I could see it actually reached to above the picture rail. Now, I'm big. I'm 6'3", but my head was a good 3-4 inches below the picture rail. This shadow was above the picture rail. And it moved. And it moved again. It went towards the living room door where my son was. And I kind of wheeled round to that because it was my kid was there. Oh, my God. And then it stopped and it moved out. And it moved along the wall to the end wall and basically just vanished. It went through the wall. Now, the wall then went to our next door neighbours because we lived in a semi-detached house. So it butted onto her kitchen. Because our houses were mirror image, they were symmetrical, so it would have gone through and out. And the weirdest thing is, I saw this and I kind of stood there for about a minute with the hair on the back of my neck standing up, and then I forgot about it. Literally, I just didn't even think about it. It just kind of went out of my head. And I sort of went into the living room, and there's my son happily sitting there colouring away. And I nipped upstairs and just looked at my oldest, and no, he was happily playing with his trains. When I came back downstairs, and I didn't want to go back in the kitchen, but I didn't know why. And then I went back in the kitchen, and everything was fine. There was no atmosphere, no nothing. So I made a cup of tea, and I just thought, okay, that was. Then I completely forgot. I didn't even think about it. Didn't mention it to my wife when she got home. Nothing. And it just seemed so odd. And then a few days later, I kind of remembered it. It's weird because I was in the same position again. I was stood there preparing tea or something, looked to the window, and it suddenly came back to me then. I thought, oh my God, I saw that shadow. And I looked back and there's nothing. And the room seemed brighter. The room just seemed like it was the same time of night, same amount of darkness, all that kind of stuff, same light bulbs. But it just seemed brighter. And it was really, really odd. And I started thinking about it, and I started feeling quite freaked out by it. And then the following day, I was putting the bins out, and I saw my next door neighbour. And her son was about my age. Her son lived with her and was about my age. And he just came around the corner. I sort of said, oh, how's it going, sort of thing. And I mentioned it. I said, look, this is going to sound really strange. If you, I'm sure I saw something almost like a shadow. He said, oh, what, in the kitchen? I said, yeah. He said, yeah. He said, sometimes you see it, but it's never done any harm. It just surprises you sometimes. He said, it's like if you see a spider suddenly scuttle across the carpet. He said, but it's never done any harm. That's it. And I just thought, okay. I never saw anything like it again, ever. But certainly, if you go to the woods, those woods at night, dogs won't go in it after dark. Most dog walkers, their dogs just bridle as soon as you get to the gates. They don't want to know. So there's something going on there. And that was my first and hopefully, touch wood, last encounter with a shadow man. But it made me reevaluate an awful lot in my own life in a very strange way. And, there you go. That's my encounter. And on basis of that, I've been researching them for a while now. And I'm hopefully got some interesting stuff to share in the very near future about it. There we go.